you should develop your conceptual framework before starting data collection. You can begin forming it while you choose and refine your research topic for a paper, thesis, or dissertation. A conceptual framework in research is a clear structure that shows how a study is organized and how its main ideas are connected. It explains how a researcher turns a general research topic into specific parts that can be studied in a systematic way. Instead of listing ideas randomly, the framework arranges them in a logical order so the research process becomes clear and controlled. The framework identifies the main outcome being studied and the factors that are assumed to influence that outcome. These factors are called variables. Some variables act as causes, while others represent results or conditions that shape the relationship. The framework explains how these variables are connected based on logical reasoning and knowledge from the field, not personal opinion. A conceptual framework also shows how abstract ideas become measurable. Broad concepts are broken down into observable elements that can be collected as data and analyzed. This step helps the researcher move from thinking about an idea to actually studying it in real settings using research tools. In research terms, a conceptual framework is a thinking model that guides how questions are formed, how variables are selected, and how relationships are examined. It presents the study as a connected system where each part has a clear role and purpose, making the research easier to understand and easier to carry out. For example, a study wants to examine how nurse staffing affects patient recovery in a hospital. The main outcome, dependent variable, is patient recovery, measured by recovery time or improvement in health status. The factors influencing it, independent variables, could be number of nurses on duty, nurse experience, and patient-to-nurse ratio. Other factors like patient age or severity of illness may act as conditions that affect the relationship. The conceptual framework shows how these variables are connected. Higher nurse staffing and more experienced nurses are assumed to improve patient recovery, while factors like age or illness severity may reduce or change this effect. This framework turns broad ideas like staffing and recovery into measurable elements that can be observed, recorded, and analyzed. It also guides the researcher on what data to collect, how to measure variables, and how to test the relationships. Steps to develop a conceptual framework in research. Step 1. Choose your research question. You can see above video to create research question. To start, clearly define the research problem you want to study. Think about what you want to find out and what can be measured or analyzed. At this stage, identify a gap in knowledge, a specific issue, or a process that needs investigation. Formulate a question that is focused, specific, and researchable, making it easier to design the study and select variables. For example, how does the number of nurses on duty affect patient recovery time? This question identifies both the factor to examine, nurse staffing, and the outcome to measure, patient recovery, providing a clear direction for the conceptual framework. Step 2. Identify independent and dependent variables. The next step is to choose the variables for your study. The independent variable is the factor you think will cause a change, while the dependent variable is the outcome you want to measure. Start with one main independent variable and one dependent variable to keep the framework simple. Each variable should be defined in a way that you can actually collect data for it, so you can count, record, or measure it in real life. You can use ChatGPT or another AI tool. Just paste your research question on ChatGPT and ask for measurable independent and dependent variables on it. For the hospital study, the number of nurses on duty is the independent variable because it may affect patient recovery. The patient recovery time is the dependent variable because it shows the effect of nurse staffing. This step turns your research question into measurable parts that can be studied and analyzed. Step 3. Visualize cause and effect relationships. After identifying your variables, the next step is to show how they influence each other. This is called a cause and effect relationship, where one variable, the cause, affects or changes another variable, the effect. A cause and effect relationship means that changes in the independent variable are expected to produce changes in the dependent variable. It does not prove the effect, but it shows the relationship you want to test. You can also think of it as a chain of influence, where one factor leads to another. Example, in the hospital study, the number of nurses on duty is the cause, and patient recovery time is the effect. You can draw a box for nurse staffing and an arrow pointing to patient recovery. This arrow shows that higher staffing is expected to reduce recovery time. Step 4. Identify other influencing variables. After mapping the main relationship between your independent and dependent variables, the next step is to identify other variables that can affect the outcome. These variables help make your framework more accurate and realistic. The main types are moderating, mediating, and control variables. Moderating variables are factors that change how strong or weak the effect of the independent variable is on the dependent variable. They do not come from the independent variable itself, but they can make the effect bigger, smaller, or even reverse it. Mediating variables are factors that explain how or why the independent variable affects the dependent variable. They are affected by the independent variable first, and then they affect the dependent variable. In other words, they link the cause to the effect. Control variables are factors that you keep the same so they do not interfere with your results. By holding them constant, you make sure that the effect you measure is really because of your independent variable and not something else. To create these variables, first list all factors that could influence your study. Decide which factors might change the effect, moderators, which might explain the effect, mediators, and which need to remain stable, controls. Clearly define each variable so it can be measured or observed. Example, in a hospital study of nurse staffing and patient recovery. Moderator, patient severity. Sicker patients may recover slower, even with more nurses. Mediator, quality of nursing care. More nurses allow better care, which then improves recovery. Control variables, age and pre-existing conditions. These are kept constant by selecting patients with similar age and health status. Graphs or visual models help show these relationships clearly. Use boxes for variables and arrows for effects. Draw an arrow from the independent variable, nurse staffing, to the dependent variable, patient recovery. Add the mediator, quality of nursing care, in between, with arrows showing the path from staffing care recovery. Place the moderator, patient severity, above or beside the main arrow, showing it affects the strength of the relationship. Control variables can be noted separately, indicating they remain constant. Using this approach, your conceptual framework becomes a clear visual map that shows both the main relationship and all other influencing factors. This makes it easier to plan data collection and explain your study to others. Step 5. Build the final conceptual framework. Organize all variables into a clear model. Place the independent variable on the left, the dependent variable on the right, mediators in between, and moderators around the main arrow. Note control variables separately. Use arrows to show direct and indirect effects clearly. In a thesis or dissertation, you can discuss the conceptual framework by explaining each variable and how they are connected in your study. Start by introducing the independent and dependent variables, then describe any mediating and moderating variables and their roles, and finally note the control variables you are keeping constant. Use the framework as a visual map or diagram and walk the reader through it, showing how the independent variable is expected to influence the dependent variable, how mediators explain the process, and how moderators may change the strength of the effect. You should include this discussion in the literature review or methodology chapter, linking it to previous research, theories, and your research questions. This makes it clear why each variable is included and how the study is structured to answer your research question.